Very good. Thank you very much. Hello, my name is Steve Tilson. I would like to speak to you for a few minutes about the election of 1960. An interesting point in the history of our country. A little bit of context to begin. Dwight Eisenhower was elected in 1952 as sort of a moderate Republican. He was a very popular man, a hero from the Second World War, of course. He did not bring in a lot of radical politics or radical new policies or ideas. He did achieve some things. He is often seen as something of a caretaker president. It was a time of considerable international tension, of course. The Cold War was at its height, and there was a good deal of tension about that, not to say paranoia in this country, McCarthy and those sorts of issues and things. But by the end of the second Eisenhower term, there was beginning to be the first faint stirrings of some reaction against what was seen as the sort of conformity and middle of the line, middle of the road, same old business as usual kind of feeling in the country. And going into this election of 1960, the Democrats thought they saw an opportunity here. And so they adopted the strategy fairly consciously of coming up with a candidate who looked and felt new and different and sort of young. The election of 1960 is, lots of people have written lots of things about it. It has been called the first TV election. The idea of presidential debates, of course, is very old. It goes all the way back, well, almost to the beginning of our country's history. Some of the most famous debates between presidential candidates was as early as the 1860s. But the 1960 debates were unique in that they were the first ones that were televised. Now, the two candidates here, as I say, the Democrats were looking for a new face, a new kind of energy. So they nominated a man who was, in comparison with most of the people who've been in the White House, quite young. He was in his 40s. John Kennedy, not terribly well known and a little bit controversial. He was the first Catholic to run for the presidency from one of the major parties. The Republicans went with a tried and true man who had been vice president under Eisenhower, Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon, good, solid, conservative, tried and true, very well-established anti-communist credentials, as I say, fairly well known. But JFK, perceived as a liberal, I would submit to you he may not have been the flaming liberal that a lot of people have tried to portray him as. I think he was really more of a pragmatic man. And he was looking at the times and looking at the situation in the country. He was, for one thing, he was very eager to prove that he was not soft on communism. This was a charge that had been raised against the Democrats. He wanted to prove that he could stand up to Nikita Khrushchev, who was the leader of the Soviet Union at that point. He did try to push some liberal policies, especially in the area of civil rights, new minimum wage law, things like that. But as I say, if you look back at actually what he accomplished, he was not the great liberal that he was seen as. However, in the election really did present a contrast. And it was a contrast that was most dramatically brought out, I think, in those televised debates. You can read about this. You can even see clips of the debates today. You can make the decision for yourself, really. Kennedy and Nixon debated on TV for a couple of hours, as I recall, and they were both very articulate men. And it's interesting that afterwards a number of people didn't watch the debates. They were also broadcast on radio. And interestingly, the folks who listened to the debates on the radio typically put them at sort of a toss-up, or even they said that Nixon had the edge. Now, the interesting thing here is that the people who actually watched the debates on TV gave the heavy favorite to Kennedy. He looked better. He was young, he was tan, he was well-dressed, he was sort of glamorous. And Nixon Nixon, frankly, did not look well. He didn't come across visually as a kind of a competent, likable, charismatic figure. And so the election is often seen as having been decided by television. So the first TV election, the election of 1960. Thank you very much.